I was 15 years old when my parents decided to move into a renovated old house in a quiet suburb of Connecticut, in a town called Milford. The house was large, built in the 1940s, with wooden floors that creaked and a spacious attic accessed through a hatch in the second-floor hallway. My parents were excited because it was bigger than our previous house and had a good backyard for my younger brother. I wasn't as excited, but I didn't complain either. The renovation looked recent, fresh paint, modern kitchen, but you could still smell that faint scent of old wood mixed with fresh paint. The attic was only used to store boxes of Christmas decorations and old family belongings. No one went up there often. In fact, after we moved in, I think only my dad went up twice to organize some things. The first time something strange happened was during a heavy rainstorm, about 3 weeks after we moved in. I woke up to the sound of rain hitting the roof and that wind that makes the house vibrate slightly. My bedroom was directly below the attic. In the middle of the rain, I heard a different creaking sound. It wasn't the normal popping of wood expanding. It was heavier, like someone shifting their weight from one foot to the other. I lay there trying to separate the sound of the rain from the other noise. Then I heard it again, a slow step. I sat up in bed immediately, my heart racing, and stared at the dark ceiling. I stayed there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was just the wind moving something in the attic. The rain was strong. You could hear the drops hitting the shingles, so it made sense that the structure of the house would creak. Still, that sound had a rhythm that didn't seem random. It wasn't a single crack. It was two separate movements, like someone stepping carefully to avoid making noise. I got out of bed and went into the hallway, still half asleep, but already with that uneasy feeling in my stomach. The attic hatch was in the ceiling of the hallway, with a small metal ring to pull down the retractable ladder. It looked closed as always. I went to my parents' bedroom and knocked on the door. My dad woke up confused, and I told him I had heard someone walking in the attic. He sighed in that way adults do when they think it's just a teenager's imagination in the middle of the night, but he got up anyway. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and went to the hallway with me. He pulled down the attic ladder, which unfolded with that familiar metal clanking sound. He climbed up slowly, shining the flashlight around. I stayed below, staring at the dark opening. I didn't hear anything else. After about 2 minutes, he came down saying nothing was out of place. The boxes were where they always were. No open windows, nothing broken. He said it was probably just the house reacting to the rain. I tried to believe him. I went back to bed and took a while to fall asleep, but the next day life went on as normal. A few days later, though, small things started disappearing. First, it was my phone charger. I had left it on my desk before going to school, and when I came back, it was just gone. I searched my entire room, under the bed, inside my backpack. Nothing. My mom thought I had taken it somewhere and forgotten. Then it was a $20 bill my dad had left on the kitchen counter. He swore he had placed it there to pay the delivery person the next day, but the bill vanished. Again, no one admitted to taking it. That same week, the flashlight that stayed in the hallway drawer also disappeared. It was the same one my dad had used to go up to the attic that rainy night. He got irritated, thinking my brother or I had taken it. I knew it wasn't me. The strangest part was that nothing big ever went missing, only small things easy to hide, and always at night. I started paying closer attention to the sounds in the house after that. Sometimes I thought I heard something above my bedroom, but when I stopped to listen, everything would go quiet. The attic became a place I avoided even thinking about. A few days later, I was walking down the hallway in the afternoon, sunlight coming through the windows, when I noticed something different about the attic hatch. It wasn't completely aligned with the ceiling. It was minimal, maybe half an inch lower on one side, like it had been pushed and not fitted back properly. It might sound like nothing, but I walked past it every day and had never seen it like that. I stood there staring at it for a few seconds, trying to remember if my dad had gone up there recently. I asked him that night, and he said he hadn't touched the attic since the rainy night. That's when I started feeling a constant unease inside the house. Nothing major happened, but small details began to bother me. Sometimes I would leave my bedroom door slightly open and find it closed. My mom said it could have been the central air conditioning, but the airflow was too weak to move a heavy wooden door. My brother also started complaining that some of his toys were out of place in the morning. My parents still thought it was just us being messy. But the hatch kept appearing slightly shifted from time to time, then back to normal as if someone adjusted it. That's when my dad decided to install a hidden camera in the hallway, pointed directly at the attic hatch. He tried to play it off, saying it was just to test a security system, but I knew he was uneasy too. He placed the camera on a high shelf behind some books so it was barely noticeable. That night we went to bed as usual. I took a while to fall asleep because every creak of the house made me hold my breath. I didn't hear anything unusual that night, at least not while I was awake. The next morning my dad looked pale. He called my mom and me into the living room and said we needed to see something. He connected his phone to the TV and opened the video recorded during the night. At first, nothing. The hallway was empty and dark with only the faint light of a lamp at the end. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when something changed. The attic hatch began to move slowly. It didn't drop open at once, it was opened carefully, as if someone was holding it from the inside to avoid making noise. I felt my stomach drop. In the video, you could clearly see the retractable ladder coming down inch by inch, without the metallic clank it always made when my dad pulled it. It was as if the person knew exactly where to hold it to avoid sound. A few seconds later, a hand appeared at the edge of the opening. It was a man's hand, dirty with dark fingernails. It gripped carefully, then another hand appeared. A man began to climb down slowly, step by step, testing each step before putting his weight on it. He was wearing dark clothes and moved with unbelievable calm. He didn't look rushed. He looked like someone who had done that many times before. When he reached the hallway floor, he stood still for a few seconds, listening. In the video, you could see him slightly turn his head, as if trying to hear whether anyone had woken up. Then he walked toward the kitchen. He didn't turn on any lights. He moved in the dark as if he knew the layout. My dad fast-forwarded a few minutes and we saw the man return down the hallway holding something small in his hand. It wasn't clear what it was. He climbed back up to the attic in the same silent way, pulling the ladder up carefully until the hatch was almost completely closed. Almost, it was always left slightly out of place. My dad turned off the video and sat in silence for a few seconds. I had never seen him like that before. He looked more shocked than scared. My mom started crying immediately. The idea that someone had been coming down into our house while we were sleeping was impossible to process. My dad called the police right away and explained what we had seen. While we waited for the patrol car, no one had the courage to go up to the attic. We all stayed in the living room, staring at the hallway as if it might open again at any moment. The silence of the house had never felt so heavy. When the police arrived, 2 officers went up first. They pulled down the ladder carefully and shined strong flashlights into the attic. They told us to stay downstairs. All I could hear were their footsteps moving across the wooden floor above. After a few minutes, they came down saying no one was there at that moment. But they found something that made everything worse. In the far corner of the attic, behind the Christmas boxes, there were folded blankets, empty water bottles, and food wrappers. It looked like a small improvised sleeping space, and it was still warm, according to one of the officers, as if it had been used recently. They searched the entire house and the yard but didn't find the man. They believed he must have heard the commotion when my dad called us to watch the video and escaped through an attic opening before the police arrived. There was a small side window in the attic that led to the roof. It was unlocked. We had never touched it. To this day, I can't sleep in a house with an attic without thinking there might be someone above me, completely still, waiting for the right moment to come down. The worst part wasn't seeing the video. It was realizing he had already been there for weeks, living just a few feet above us without making a single sound. Story 2. I was 38 years old when this happened. I had just gotten divorced and was living alone in a townhouse complex in Fort Collins, Colorado. It was a quiet place with houses that were practically identical, each with its own garage in the front and a small common area in the back. The garage was automatic and gave direct access to the kitchen through an internal door. After the divorce, I was trying to get used to the silence of the house. My kids stayed with me only on weekends, so during the week it was just me. I worked remotely, spent most of my time inside the house, and barely saw the neighbors. Nights were the worst. The house felt bigger than it really was when it was empty. The first time I noticed something strange was on a Tuesday night. I woke up around 3 in the morning with a strange feeling, like something had woken me, but I didn't know what. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a few seconds until I noticed a different light reflecting on the hallway wall. It wasn't street light. It was stronger and coming from the direction of the kitchen. I got up and walked there, still half asleep. When I entered the kitchen, I saw that the garage light was on. I was sure I had turned it off before going to bed. The internal door was closed as always. I opened it slowly and looked into the garage. Nothing seemed out of place. My car was there, the outer door closed. I simply turned off the light and went back to bed, thinking maybe I had been distracted. The next night it happened again, almost at the same time. I woke up with that feeling that something wasn't right, as if the silence had changed. When I looked toward the hallway, the same light was coming from the kitchen. This time I got up faster. I went to the garage door and before opening it, stood there for a few seconds listening. I didn't hear anything. No garage motor, no footsteps, no car noise. I opened the door slowly. The light was on again. Everything looked normal. The car in place, the boxes against the wall, my tools hanging up. I started thinking it might be some electrical issue. Maybe old wiring was causing it. This continued for 3 more nights in a row. Always in the middle of the night, always the light on. I started locking the internal door before going to bed, something I hadn't done before. I also began checking whether the garage door was really closed. There were no signs of forced entry, no marks, nothing out of place. Until one Friday night when I woke up again and went to the kitchen, I felt something different. Before even opening the garage door, I noticed something on the internal doorknob. There were marks, small dark smudges near the metal, as if someone had touched it with dirty fingers. I turned on the kitchen light and stepped closer. The marks were recent. They weren't dry or spread out like old dust. They were fingerprints, slightly smeared, as if someone had tried to turn the knob with a hand dirty with grease or dirt. I stood there staring at it for a few seconds, trying to remember if I could have done that myself while handling something in the garage. But I hadn't done anything that would have dirtied my hands that week. I barely used the tools. And even if I had, I would have remembered touching it. My heart started beating faster. I opened the garage door slowly, feeling a strange coldness in my stomach. The light was already on again. I looked around for anything out of place. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the old bicycle I kept leaning at the back of the garage. It was an old bike left behind by the previous homeowner, and I never touched it. It was now closer to my car, slightly tilted as if it had been moved and set back down. It wasn't a big change, but I knew I hadn't touched it. I passed by it every day when coming and going with the car. At that moment, I felt a different kind of fear than I had before. It wasn't a sudden scare. It was the feeling that someone had been inside while I was sleeping. I stood in the middle of the garage trying to hear something, as if the person might still be hiding behind the boxes. The air was cold, with that faint smell of rubber and concrete typical of a closed garage. I closed and locked the internal door. Then I went to the automatic garage door panel to check for any malfunction. The remote I used stayed on the kitchen table. I never left it in the car. I started thinking maybe the door was opening on its own and someone was quickly stepping inside. The next day I decided to check the automatic door system more carefully. The panel had an opening history feature I had never used. I connected through the app and looked at the logs. That's when my stomach dropped. There were records of the garage door opening during the early morning hours, exactly the times I had been asleep. It wasn't an electrical glitch. The system recorded it as remote control activation. And I was alone in the house. I hadn't used the remote at those times. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone for several minutes, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe the system was malfunctioning. Maybe a neighbor had a remote on the same frequency. But the complex wasn't that old and each house had its own code. I started remembering that the previous owner had lived there for many years before selling. Maybe he still had an old remote that had never been deactivated. The idea that someone had a remote that could open my garage made my chest feel heavy. The garage gave direct access to the kitchen. If the internal door hadn't been locked, the person could easily walk into the house. That night I stayed awake on purpose. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark living room, with partial view of the kitchen and the garage door. It was almost 2:30 a.m. when I heard the low sound of the garage motor. It wasn't loud. It was that short electric hum when it begins to rise. My heart started racing immediately. I didn't move. I stayed completely still, listening. The door rose all the way up and stopped. I could feel cold air entering through the garage. A few seconds later, I heard a light step on the concrete. Someone was inside. I stayed frozen in the dark, trying to control my breathing so I wouldn't make a sound. The only noise was the faint echo of that step in the garage and the motor finishing its movement. I hadn't locked the internal door that night on purpose because I wanted to be sure of what was happening. The garage door handle turned slowly. I clearly heard the metallic click being pressed but not fully forced. The door opened a few inches. The garage light was off, so only faint street light filtered under the raised door. I saw the shadow of someone on the other side, standing there as if listening too. My entire body was tense. I had already called the police before turning off the lights and had left the phone on silent, ready to press the emergency button if necessary. The person didn't step fully inside. They stayed in the crack of the door as if assessing the environment. After a few seconds that felt eternal, I heard the door closing slowly. The handle returned to its normal position. Then I heard footsteps retreating through the garage and the automatic door lowering again. Everything happened in less than a minute. I didn't move until I was certain the garage door was completely shut. I waited a few more seconds before standing up. My legs were stiff from staying so still. I walked slowly to the kitchen and turned on the light. The garage door was closed, but the handle was still slightly tilted, as if it had just been released. I opened it and stepped into the garage. The door was fully closed. The air still felt colder than usual, as if it had just been opened. I looked at the floor and saw faint shoe sole marks on the concrete, visible under the light. They weren't mine. I had been barefoot that night. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They checked the garage, the outside area, and the perimeter of the complex, but didn't find anyone. When I showed them the garage door opening history in the app, one of the officers confirmed that it indicated valid remote use, not an electrical malfunction. He asked if I had changed the code since moving in. I said no. The next day, I called the company that installed the system and asked them to completely reprogram the garage door, erasing all old remotes. They said it was common for previous homeowners to forget to return extra remotes. After the code was changed, the garage never opened during the night again. The light never turned on by itself. But what has never left my mind is the fact that someone entered my garage several times while I was asleep. And on that last night, the person opened the internal door of my house and stood just inches away from stepping fully inside. I never found out who had the old remote. It could have been the former owner, someone from his family, or someone who simply kept a copy. What still bothers me today isn't knowing who it was. It's knowing that if I hadn't checked the history and changed the code, that person could have continued entering without me ever realizing it. Story 3. I was 25 years old when this happened, and I was living alone in a ground-floor apartment in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the Bayview neighborhood. It was an old red brick building with 4 units, and my bedroom faced a shared courtyard between my building and the one next door. The courtyard had large trash bins, a low wooden fence, and very little lighting at night. I worked at a cafe downtown and almost always got home at the same time, around 10 p.m. My routine was predictable. I would eat something quick, take a shower, and go to my bedroom to scroll on my phone before going to sleep. I never thought much about my bedroom windows because they had white blinds that I always closed before changing clothes. The messages started on a Tuesday night. I was lying in bed when I received an SMS from an unknown number. No photo, no name. The message said, "You always turn off the light at 11:43. I looked at my phone clock. It was 11:45. My stomach tightened slightly, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a friend joking around. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, another message came in. "You left the bathroom light on longer today." That made me genuinely uncomfortable. I hadn't told anyone that I had taken longer in the shower because I was tired. I started feeling that kind of unease that makes you look around the entire room as if something is out of place. I sat on the bed staring at my phone for several minutes. My first thought was that someone was trying to scare me. Maybe a coworker knew my address and was passing by on the street. But the detail about the bathroom light confused me. That couldn't be seen from the main street. The only way to notice that would be from the courtyard, practically pressed up against the side window of my apartment. I slowly got up and went to the bedroom window. The blinds were closed, but not completely tight. There were small gaps between the slats. I leaned in carefully and shifted one slat slightly to look outside. The courtyard was almost completely dark. The only light came from a distant street lamp behind the other building. The large trash bins cast long shadows across the concrete. I didn't see anyone standing there. No movement. No sound. Just a faint breeze rustling a plastic bag caught on the fence. I felt a little ridiculous for already imagining someone watching me. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe I had mentioned my schedule somewhere. I went back to bed trying to ignore it. But before turning off the light, another message arrived. Good night. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. I worked normally, talked with coworkers, even showed the messages to a friend, but she thought it was just someone trying to scare me. I almost convinced myself of that too. But that night, when I came home and followed my routine, my phone vibrated again. It was the same number. The message said, "You locked the door twice today." My blood ran cold. I really had locked it twice because I was thinking about the messages from the previous night. That wasn't something someone could easily guess. I immediately looked at my apartment door. It was in the living room, not the bedroom. To know that I had turned the key twice, the person would have had to be close enough to hear or see it. I started to feel pressure in my chest. I went to the bedroom window again, but this time I stayed a few steps back, trying to see without exposing myself. I stood there in the dark, with the light off, staring at the courtyard. Nothing looked different. Then my phone vibrated again. "You're looking now?" My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might faint. My entire body went rigid. The message had arrived seconds after I approached the window. That meant the person was actually watching me at that exact moment. I instinctively crouched down on the floor out of the window's line of sight. My breathing became short and uneven. I tried to control the panic and think logically. Maybe it was someone in the building next door looking from a higher window. Maybe I had been watched for days and had only just realized it. I stayed on the floor for a few minutes, staring at my phone, unsure what to do. After a while, I slowly stood up and, instead of approaching the window directly, positioned myself beside it, using the wall as cover. I pulled the blind just enough to look at the reflection in the glass rather than straight outside. That's when I saw something that made my stomach drop, a small bright dot in the darkness of the courtyard. It wasn't large. It was a tiny reflection, but it was aligned exactly in the direction of my window. It looked like the reflection of a lens. It stayed there for a few seconds, perfectly still. Then it shifted slightly to the side. For a few seconds, I couldn't think clearly. I stared at that bright point, trying to convince my brain that it could just be light, reflecting off metal or glass from the trash bins. But the reflection moved again in a controlled way, as if someone were adjusting the angle. A cold chill ran up my spine. My bedroom was completely dark, so any lens pointed inside would have a clear view once eyes adjusted to the low light. I stepped away from the window and leaned against the wall, trying to decide whether to call the police right then or if I was overreacting. My phone vibrated again. "Don't close the blinds." That's what the message said. A wave of real panic hit me, the kind that makes your hands shake. I pulled the blinds down completely and ran into the living room. I locked the door again, even though it was already locked. I called the police, my voice breaking, and explained that someone was watching me from the courtyard and sending messages in real time. While I was talking, I heard a low noise coming from outside near the trash bins, like something metallic being dragged. I stayed on the line with the police while staring at my apartment door, as if someone might try to come in at any moment. The noise in the courtyard continued for a few seconds and then stopped. It didn't sound like someone running. It sounded like someone moving something heavy carefully. The dispatcher asked for my full address and said a patrol car was on the way. I didn't have the courage to go back to the bedroom to look out the window again. I stayed in the living room with all the lights off, trying to hear any movement outside. My heart was beating so fast I could feel the pulse in my temples. A few minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance. That's when I heard quick footsteps in the courtyard, this time clearly running. The siren grew closer, and then I saw blue lights reflecting on the living room wall. The police entered the courtyard with flashlights and started shining them behind the trash bins and near the fence. I watched through a crack in the front door while they searched everything. One of the officers found something behind the large trash bins. A small folding ladder, the kind used to reach higher windows. It was positioned exactly below the line of my bedroom window. The officers also found recent marks on the concrete, light scratches where the ladder had been dragged. One of them looked up at my window and measured the height with his flashlight. The ladder was tall enough for someone to stand almost level with my bedroom blinds. My legs felt weak. They asked if I suspected anyone, and I mentioned the building next door since the courtyard was shared. One of the officers went over there and started knocking on doors. Some residents answered sleepily. Others said they hadn't heard anything. There was a man who lived alone on the second floor of the building next door, who, according to the property manager, was reserved and barely spoke to anyone. When the officers knocked on his door, no one answered. The lights were off. They wrote down his name and said they would investigate the messages through the anonymous number. In the days that followed, I avoided being alone in the apartment as much as possible. My mom came to stay with me for a few nights. The police informed me that the number used was from a prepaid app that was difficult to trace. 3 days later, I found out that the neighbor from the building next door had left the apartment suddenly. The property manager commented that he had moved out unexpectedly and that the unit was almost empty. The police never officially confirmed it was him, but they said they were investigating. I never received another message after that night. But what still haunts me isn't just the idea that someone was watching me. It's knowing that the person knew my exact schedule. Knew when I turned off the light, when I woke up in the middle of the night, when I changed clothes. That doesn't happen in a single day. Someone had been studying my routine with precision, and I will never know for how long. Story 4. I was 30 years old when this happened. My wife and I decided to rent an isolated cabin in rural Tennessee, near a small town called Tellico Plains. The idea was to spend a weekend away from Nashville, with no phones ringing, no traffic, just rest. The house was in the middle of an area surrounded by dense woods, with a dirt road leading up to it. There were no visible neighbors. The owner said it was common to see deer and hear coyotes at night. The house was old, wooden, renovated inside, but still with original details like heavy doors and old locks. There was a side door that led to the back of the house near the kitchen. The owner mentioned that she hardly ever used that door and that it was always kept locked. The first night was calm. We made dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the porch listening to the sounds of the forest. At night, you could hear insects, wind moving through the trees, and occasional cracks in the brush. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We locked all the doors before going to sleep, including the side one, which I personally tested twice because the lock looked old. We slept well that night. The second night was different. I woke up around 3 in the morning with the feeling that the house was too quiet. I couldn't hear the insects, just the faint sound of wind. I lay there for a few minutes trying to understand what had woken me, but I couldn't identify anything specific. I got up to use the bathroom, and as I passed through the kitchen, I noticed something that made me stop immediately. The side door was slightly open, not wide open, but not completely closed. I could see a dark gap between the wood and the frame. My first thought was that I might have forgotten to lock it, but I clearly remembered testing that lock before going to bed. It only turned from the inside. On the outside, there was no functional handle, just an old metal plate. I felt a chill in my stomach and slowly approached. I touched the door and gently pushed. It opened a few more inches, creaking softly. I looked outside, just darkness and the outline of trees in the distance. The early morning air was colder, with a strong smell of damp earth. I didn't hear footsteps or branches snapping. Nothing. My wife appeared behind me asking what was going on. I explained that the door was open. She turned pale immediately. We checked the lock. There were no signs of forced entry. The internal latch was simply unlocked. I was certain I had left it locked. It didn't make sense for someone to open it from outside. We stood there for a few seconds trying to decide what to do. The house was completely dark except for the faint kitchen light. I grabbed a knife from the drawer, more out of reflex than because I believed it would actually help. I walked through the room slowly, checking every corner. The living room was as we left it, the fireplace out, our bags in the same place. The guest bedroom was empty, the bathroom untouched. There was no sign that anyone had disturbed anything. Nothing out of place, no windows open. The silence inside the house felt heavy, as if the air itself were different. When we returned to the kitchen, we noticed something that wasn't the same. One of the dining chairs had been moved. It was positioned under the handle of the front door, tilted as if someone had tried to block the entrance from the inside using the chair as support. I am absolutely certain we did not leave the chair there. The table was in the center of the kitchen, not pushed against the door. My wife looked at me with that expression that mixes fear and disbelief. If someone had entered, why would they try to block the front door? And why would they leave through the side door, which only opened from the inside? At that moment, I began to feel that maybe someone had been inside the house while we were sleeping. The idea sounded absurd, but it was the only explanation that made sense. The chair hadn't moved there on its own. The side door hadn't unlocked itself. I went to the front door and tested the handle. It was locked as we had left it. The chair was positioned so that if someone tried to open it from outside, they would encounter resistance. That wasn't something we would have done absent-mindedly. I clearly remembered that we had gone straight to bed after locking everything. We decided not to go back to sleep that night. We sat in the living room with the lights on until the sun began to lighten the forest. Every small sound outside seemed amplified. Branches snapping, leaves dragged by the wind. Nothing clearly human, but nothing reassuring either. As soon as it was fully daylight, I went outside to look around the house. The ground was dirt mixed with dry leaves. I walked around the side where the door we found open was located. That's when I saw the footprints. They came from the direction of the woods, following a nearly straight line to the side of the house. They were clear marks in the damp soil of the early morning. They looked like boot prints, with distinct soles. I followed the trail with my eyes, trying to find the way back, but there were no footprints leading away from the house in that same area. Only incoming prints. I walked completely around the house, searching for any continuation of the trail, but I found nothing that indicated someone had left the same way. The ground was soft enough to show impressions. If someone had gone back through the same direction, I would have seen it. I went back inside and told my wife what I had found. She became even more nervous. We called the property owner and explained everything. She insisted that no one had an extra key besides her and that the side door hadn't been used in years. She said that maybe the wind could have moved the latch, but that didn't explain the chair at the front door or the footprints. We decided to leave that same morning. As I loaded the bags into the car, I couldn't stop looking at the tree line. The woods were dense enough to hide someone standing there, watching. To this day, I don't know how that person got in or out. The side door could only be opened from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing was stolen. But someone entered the house while we were asleep, moved the chair as if to prevent someone else from coming in through the front door, and then left by some route we couldn't identify. The owner never admitted to any previous issues. We never went back. And every time I think about that chair positioned against the door, I'm left with the feeling that whoever was there didn't want to get in. They wanted to stop something else from getting in after them. Story 5. I was 16 years old when this happened, and I lived with my parents in a suburban house in Northern California, in a quiet neighborhood in Sacramento. My parents worked all day, and I was alone almost every afternoon after school. The house was attached on one side, and on the other there was a narrow passage between the wall of the house and the side fence that separated it from the neighbor. It was so narrow that an adult could barely squeeze through sideways. From the street you could hardly see that space because it was hidden behind the garage. I used to spend my afternoons in my bedroom, playing on the computer or doing homework with the door closed and sometimes locked out of habit. The knocking started lightly, almost imperceptibly. Always around 4:30 in the afternoon. It was 3 or 4 soft taps on my bedroom wall, on the side that faced the narrow passage. At first I thought it was old plumbing or the structure expanding because of the heat. Sacramento gets very hot in the summer, and the house made strange noises sometimes. I didn't even mention it to my parents because it seemed silly. But the timing started to bother me. It was always practically the same. I would look at the clock when I heard it, and it almost always showed between 4:20 and 4:40. As the weeks passed, the knocking became clearer. It wasn't loud banging, it was controlled tapping, as if someone were knocking with their knuckles on the wall, testing something. Always in the same spot, near the height of my desk. I started paying closer attention and even pressed my ear against the wall once to try to figure out whether it was coming from inside the structure or from outside. The sound felt external. I could feel a slight vibration in the paint, almost like a real touch from the other side. Even so, I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe the neighbor was moving something in the yard. One day I decided to look outside. I went out the front door and walked to the side of the house. The narrow passage between the wall and the fence was tighter than I remembered. The ground was uneven concrete with some dry leaves piled up toward the back. There was nothing there. No tools, no objects leaning against the wall. I stood there for a few seconds looking at my bedroom window from that angle. It was a blind spot from the street. No one driving by would be able to see someone standing there. I went back inside thinking I might be overreacting. The following week, the knocking continued. I started getting tense whenever it was close to 4 in the afternoon. It was like waiting for something inevitable. Sometimes I would sit in complete silence in my room just to hear it better. The taps would come, always soft, never rushed, and then they would stop after a few seconds. I mentioned it to my mom once, but she said it was probably the house expanding or a small animal passing through the side passage. That gave me some relief, but deep down I knew it didn't sound like an animal. It was too regular, too intentional. Then, one particularly quiet afternoon, something different happened. I was sitting on my bed using my phone when I heard the knocks, like always. 3 light taps on the wall. I took a deep breath and looked at my bedroom door. A few seconds later, I heard a sound I had never heard before, a soft click. I lifted my head and saw my doorknob slowly turning. It wasn't a sudden movement, it was slow, like someone was testing whether it was unlocked. My heart started racing instantly. I always kept it locked. I froze completely, staring at the knob. It turned as far as it could and stopped, as if the person on the other side had realized it was locked. I felt the blood rush to my face and my hands started sweating. No one else was home. My parents wouldn't be back until after 6. The sound of the knob returning to its normal position was almost worse than the initial movement. I slowly got up from the bed and stood a few steps from the door, trying to hear anything from the other side. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought the person might hear it. I stood there for maybe a full minute. Then I heard light footsteps in the hallway of the house, but they weren't coming from inside. They were coming from outside, following along the side of my bedroom wall. They were careful footsteps, almost dragging, like someone moving through that narrow passage between the house and the fence. I moved closer to the window but didn't look straight out. I opened just a small gap in the blinds to see the reflection in the glass. I didn't see anyone at that moment, but I could hear the faint crunch of dry leaves being stepped on outside. I felt a very clear certainty that someone was in that narrow passage, pressed against my wall. It no longer made sense to blame plumbing. I grabbed my phone and started recording audio, just to have some proof in case something happened. I stayed completely silent, trying to capture any sound. After a few seconds, I heard another light tap on the wall, this time softer, almost like a confirmation that I was inside. My entire body went rigid. I thought about running out the front door, but I would have had to cross the living room and possibly pass near the side window. I waited until I heard footsteps slowly moving away. Only then did I unlock my bedroom door and go to the living room. I looked through the peephole of the front door, but didn't see anyone on the street. I waited a few more minutes before going out the front and walking around to the side of the house. When I reached the narrow passage, I noticed something different on the ground. The dry leaves were crushed as if someone had just walked through. There were also shoe prints in the dust accumulated near the fence. I felt a tightness in my chest because that confirmed it wasn't my imagination. That night I told my parents everything, this time insisting it wasn't just house noises. My dad took it more seriously when I mentioned the doorknob turning. The next day he installed 2 outdoor cameras, one at the front of the house and another specifically pointed at that narrow passage between the wall and the fence. The camera was positioned discreetly, but captured the entire angle of the space. We decided not to tell the neighbors yet. We wanted to understand first if someone was really going in there. 2 days later, around 4:30 in the afternoon, my dad's phone sent a notification. Motion detected on the side of the house. I was in my bedroom when I heard again the 3 soft knocks on the wall. My heart started racing, but this time I knew the camera was recording. I stayed still, making no noise. Minutes later, my dad called me from work, his voice tense. He was watching the live video feed. A thin man, dressed in dark clothes and wearing a cap. entered the narrow passage from the back of the lot. He walked pressed against the wall, looking directly at my bedroom window. My dad described what he was seeing while I remained frozen in my room. The man stopped exactly at the height of my window. He stood there for a few seconds as if listening. Then he raised his hand and knocked 3 times on the wall. I felt the sound vibrate on my side. He then moved to the side door that led to the laundry room, tested the handle and paused again. Next, he walked around toward the front of the house, but always staying close to the wall, avoiding the street's line of sight. On the video, you could clearly see that he knew where the front camera didn't reach. At that exact moment, I heard my bedroom doorknob turn again. I already had it locked, but seeing that movement while knowing someone was outside left me almost breathless. My dad said the man tried the door for a few seconds and then stepped away when he heard my footsteps inside the room. I made sure to walk deliberately so he would know I was there. On the video, the man stopped, tilted his head as if listening, and then left through the same narrow passage, disappearing toward the back of the lot, where there was a small section of broken fence that gave access to a more open area between the houses. We called the police immediately and showed them the footage. They wrote everything down but said that since he hadn't managed to enter, it would be difficult to do much beyond patrolling the area. In the following days, 2 neighbors confirmed that they had seen a man walking between the houses at night, but they thought he was someone looking for recyclables in the trash bins. After the cameras were installed and we reinforced the locks, there were never any more knocks on the wall. The man was never identified. What still bothers me to this day is knowing that that passage was invisible from the street. He could go in and out without anyone noticing, and for weeks I thought it was just old plumbing. Story 6. I am 29 years old, and at the beginning of last year my wife and I bought our first house in Ohio, in a small town near Dayton. We had been renting since we got married, so buying this house was a milestone for both of us. The neighborhood is old, full of houses from the 50s and 60s, all very similar, quiet street. Older neighbors who sit on their porches in the late afternoon. The house needed small renovations, nothing structural, mostly cosmetic things. Painting, replacing carpet, fixing the built-in closet in the master bedroom that looked somewhat improvised. I work remotely, so I spent the entire day inside measuring walls, pulling off baseboards, sanding doors. My wife left early for the hospital where she works and came back in the late afternoon. During the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. The smell of an old house, aged wood, that fine drywall dust in the air. Nothing that truly stood out. The closet in our master bedroom was strange from the beginning. It had a panel covering the upper part, as if someone had sealed off the space above with a thin piece of wood painted white. It wasn't the real ceiling. It was something added later. You could tell because the paint was different and there were slightly crooked nails holding it in place. I thought maybe it was just to reduce the space and make it look more finished. But at night, especially after 2 a.m., I started hearing small noises coming from there. They weren't the normal expansion cracks of wood, which I was already familiar with. They were more localized sounds, like something lightly pressing and then releasing. I would wake up sweating and lie in silence trying to identify where it was coming from. Sometimes it sounded exactly above my head. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was wind hitting the roof or the heating system turning on. But the sound always came from the same spot, above that improvised closet panel. One of those nights I woke up to a different sound. It wasn't a crack. It was like something slowly scraping, dragging a few inches. I sat up immediately. The bedroom was dark, only the faint street light coming through the curtain gap. My wife was still asleep, breathing heavily. I stayed still, waiting to hear it again. My heart started racing, the kind of feeling you get when you think you heard someone inside the house. A few seconds later, I heard it again, a light weight shifting position above the closet. It wasn't loud, but it was too clear to ignore. I got up, felt the cold floor under my feet, and walked slowly to the closet. I opened the door. The smell of paint and old wood hit me strongly. I stared at that white panel, trying to decide if I was becoming paranoid. The next day, I decided to mess with it. My wife thought it was overreacting, but she admitted she had also heard strange noises at night. I grabbed a small ladder and a screwdriver and started pulling the nails out of the improvised panel. The wood was looser than I expected, as if it had already been handled before. When I loosened the first section, some dust fell onto my face. The space above wasn't just a small gap. It was a large area between the real ceiling and the roof, tall enough for someone to crawl inside. I shined my phone flashlight up there and felt my stomach drop. It wasn't empty like I had imagined. There was a nearly full water bottle, the kind you buy at any grocery store, crumpled cereal bar wrappers, and a folded blanket, as if someone had carefully left it there. The air inside smelled stuffy, different from the rest of the house. It wasn't old mold. It smelled recently used. I stood there for a few seconds, staring, unable to speak. My first reaction was to look for a logical explanation. I thought maybe it belonged to the previous owner, who might have used the space as improvised storage. But the water bottle was clean, with no dust buildup. When I moved the flashlight, I could see slight condensation inside. The food wrappers weren't dried out. They looked recent. The blanket didn't smell old. It smelled like used fabric, a bit of sweat mixed with trapped air. My wife climbed the ladder behind me and turned pale immediately when she saw it. The first thing she asked was this here when we moved in? The answer was obvious. We would have seen it. I had looked through that entire closet when we painted. That stuff hadn't been there before. I was still trying to process it when I heard the sound. This time it wasn't a crack. It was weight shifting above the part I hadn't opened yet. Something moving carefully but too quickly to be wood settling. A chill ran from the back of my neck down my spine. My wife climbed down immediately. The sound came again, clearer now, like someone placing a knee down and then a hand, crawling away from the open section. I froze for a second, trying to decide if it could be an animal. But it wasn't the light, irregular sound of a rat. It was heavier, rhythmic, controlled. I stepped back from the ladder. Then I heard running footsteps across the ceiling above us, fast, heading away from the bedroom. The noise intensified for 2 or 3 seconds, like someone trying to move as quickly as possible without breaking through the ceiling. The wood above us vibrated slightly. My wife started crying immediately, nervous, uncontrollable crying. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it echoed through the entire room. The only thing I could do was grab her by the arm and leave the bedroom. The realization was overwhelming. Someone was up there. Someone had been up there while we slept for days, maybe weeks. As we reached the living room, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hand so sweaty I almost dropped it. While I explained that someone was in the space between the ceiling and the roof, we heard another sound. It came from the side of the house near the bedroom. A dull noise like something heavy sliding and then hitting. Then a brief metallic scrape, as if something had brushed against a vent. I ran to the living room window and carefully pulled back the curtain. The street was empty, yellow street lights, everything seemingly normal. But along the side of the house, near the roof vent, I saw a shadow moving too quickly to be imagination. Someone was climbing down or jumping into the neighbor's yard. When I opened the front door, I only heard footsteps running across grass and then absolute silence. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. While we waited, I stood in the living room holding a baseball bat I didn't even know how to properly use. The silence inside the house was worse than the noise had been. When the officers entered, they went straight to the bedroom with flashlights and asked me to show them exactly where the space was. The stuffy smell still lingered in the closet. They opened the panel further, searched carefully, found the wrappers, the bottle, the blanket. One of them said it definitely didn't look old. Another went outside and confirmed that the side roof vent was loose, as if it had recently been removed and put back in place. They searched the yard and spoke with 2 nearby neighbors, but no one had seen anything. One of the officers asked how long we had been living there. When I said just over a month, he made a strange expression, as if putting pieces together. He explained they had seen cases of people using spaces like that to hide temporarily, especially in newly occupied houses where the residents don't yet know all the structural details. That gave me a knot in my stomach. It meant someone had likely been up there while we lived our normal routine underneath. They filed a report, but said that without catching the person in the act, there wasn't much more they could do that night. Before leaving, one officer recommended sealing the access completely with screws and possibly a reinforced drywall panel. After they left, the house felt different. It wasn't just an old house with normal noises anymore. It was a place where someone had lived above our heads without us knowing. I went back upstairs carefully, even though I was scared, and stared at the empty space with the flashlight. The blanket was still there, folded, the wrappers scattered. The water bottle I was certain hadn't been there when we painted. I started thinking about how many nights I woke up thirsty and walked to the kitchen while someone was just inches above me. How many times I lay in bed scrolling on my phone, unaware that I wasn't truly alone. The feeling wasn't just fear, it was a strange invasion, like our privacy had been used without our knowledge. We spent that night at her parents' house. The next day, I returned with a friend and completely sealed the space. I installed thick screws, a new panel, proper sealing. I also installed a camera in the bedroom facing the closet, and another in the hallway. To this day, we've never heard footsteps up there again. We've never seen anyone return. But sometimes when the house is empty because we're out for a few hours, I think about that side roof vent. I wonder if that person knew our exact schedule, if they watched us sleep. And the worst part is that I'll never know how long it had been happening before I decided to rip that panel down. The house is still ours. Life moved on. But every time I hear a crack at night, my body reacts before my mind does. I can never fall asleep without thinking about the space above the closet. Story 7. I am 34 years old, and I moved into this house in a quiet suburb of Georgia shortly after my divorce. Everything happened very fast. I needed to leave the apartment where I had lived with my ex-husband, and I found this house for rent in Marietta, on a street full of old trees and neighbors who seemed to have lived there for decades. It was the kind of neighborhood where people hang flags on their porches and leave Christmas lights up until February. The house wasn't new, but it was well maintained. Hardwood floors, an old kitchen, doors that creaked a little, nothing out of the ordinary. I was emotionally exhausted at the time, trying to reorganize my life. Working during the day, coming back to an empty house at night, I thought the silence would be comforting, and at first it was. The house had an old alarm system installed, the kind with a numeric keypad on the wall near the front door. The landlord said it had been there for years, and that I could use it if I wanted. The security company still operated the system. I just had to keep the contract active. I decided to keep it because living alone after years of marriage messes with your head. The code wasn't changed when I moved in. The landlord said it had been the same for years, but that I could change it later. I postponed it. Honestly, I was dealing with so much emotionally that changing a code ended up at the bottom of the list. I just wanted to sleep without overthinking. During the first week, everything seemed normal. I would arm the alarm before bed, hear the short beep confirming it was set, and go to my bedroom trying to convince myself I was safe there. The first time something strange happened was on a Wednesday night close to midnight. I was on the couch half watching TV, eating something straight from the package because I hadn't fully organized the kitchen yet. The house was cold, that damp chill that settles in when the temperature drops and the wood seems to hold onto the cold air. I had a lamp on in the living room, and the rest of the house was dark. When I stood up to take a glass to the sink, I heard the alarm go off. It was that loud, sharp sound that fills the entire house, with the automated voice saying something like, "Back door," and repeating it. I froze immediately, glass in hand. My whole body went hot, like the blood had rushed upward all at once. I felt my throat tighten. The panel near the front door was flashing frantically. It clearly indicated back door open. But I knew I hadn't gone anywhere near the back door that night. I tried not to panic, but it's hard to think rationally when you're alone and an alarm system is telling you someone opened your door. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and entered the code to disarm it. When the alarm stopped, the house became too quiet, as if the sound had sucked all the air out of the place. I stood there for a few seconds, listening for any noise coming from the hallway or kitchen. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the heating system turning on and off. I grabbed a knife from the drawer because it was the first thing my mind thought made sense. I felt ridiculous holding a knife, but I held it anyway. I walked slowly to the kitchen, trying to step in a way that made the floor creak as little as possible. Every step sounded too loud. I reached the back door and it was locked, fully locked. I tested it twice. The handle didn't turn. The deadbolt was in place. And still, the alarm had registered it as opened. I stood there for a few minutes staring at the door, as if it would give me some explanation. I touched the wood. It felt cold. I looked at the small glass panel at the top and saw nothing but my own distorted reflection in the kitchen light. The backyard was dark, only faint streetlight reaching the fence. No movement, no sound, not even a dog barking. I went back to the alarm panel and checked the message again. Zone 3, back door. It wasn't a generic error. It was too specific. I tried to remember if maybe I had closed it improperly earlier and the wind had pushed it, but there wasn't strong wind that night. And even if there had been, the lock wouldn't just open on its own. I spent the rest of the night with every light in the house on. I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak in the wood seemed louder than it should have. The next morning, I called the security company. I explained what had happened, and the representative said it could be a faulty sensor since the system was old. He spoke in a tone that was almost too calm, as if this were common. I asked if the record showed an actual opening or just a malfunction. He confirmed the system had logged it as physical opening of zone. That made me uncomfortable. I asked them to send a technician, but he could only come 2 days later. I tried to convince myself it was just a defect. I worked from home that day, but every time the heating system clicked on, my heart jumped. I started noticing how the house made small sounds I had never paid attention to before. Air moving through cracks, the kitchen clock ticking, the subtle pop of old windows. Everything felt closer, more personal. 2 days later, on Friday, I decided to sleep at a friend's house. I was still shaken from the divorce, so I used that as an excuse not to stay alone that night. I left around 9 in the evening. Before leaving, I armed the alarm as usual. I heard the confirmation beep and saw on the display that all zones were closed. I locked the front door twice, as I had been doing since the false alarm. As I drove to her house, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe it was just accumulated anxiety. Maybe I was projecting insecurity from being alone for the first time in years. I even joked with her that my alarm system was being dramatic. But deep down, I wasn't calm. Something about that specific backdoor record didn't make sense. I returned home on Saturday around 10 in the morning. The street looked normal. Neighbors tending to gardens, nothing unusual. I went inside, disarmed the system, and didn't notice anything immediately strange. But when I reached the kitchen, I smelled a faint scent of damp soil. It wasn't strong, but it was there. I thought maybe it came from the yard, since it had lightly rained overnight. The back door was still locked, the handle in the same position. I tried to ignore the feeling all day. That night, already in bed, I armed the alarm again. I was exhausted and fell asleep quickly. At 3:17 a.m., the panel made a short sound, different from the loud alarm. Just a single beep. I woke up startled. I lay still listening, waiting for another sound. Nothing came. I thought maybe I had dreamed it. I stared at the bedroom ceiling, trying to decide if it had been a dream. The room was dark, only the bluish glow of the alarm display in the hallway faintly reflecting on the wall. I heard no footsteps, no doors opening, nothing that suggested movement inside the house. Still, my body was on alert. My heart was racing, and I felt that tension in my shoulders, like I was waiting for something to happen. After a few minutes, I got up slowly and walked to the panel in the hallway. The display read, "System disarmed." That confused me instantly. I had armed it before going to bed. I clearly remembered the long confirmation beep, and now it was disarmed. There was no error message, no intrusion alert, just disarmed manually at 3:17. A cold feeling settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the house temperature. I knew I hadn't gotten up to enter the code. I had slept straight through from when I lay down. I stared at the keypad as if it would offer some clue. I wondered if I could have sleepwalked and done it without remembering, but I had no history of sleepwalking, none. I turned on the hallway light and checked the doors one by one. Front door locked, back door locked, windows closed, everything intact. And still, the system clearly showed that the correct code had been entered at 3:17 a.m. This wasn't a faulty sensor this time. It was a record of manual disarming with a valid code. The next morning, I called the security company again, my voice different this time. I explained that the system had registered a manual disarm in the middle of the night while I was asleep. The representative was silent for a few seconds while checking the logs. Then he said, in a tone that was almost too neutral, that the correct code had been entered at 3:17. There were no failed attempts, no wrong code entries beforehand, just the correct code. My mouth went dry. I asked if there was any possibility of a technical failure generating a record like that. He said malfunctions usually appear as communication errors or open zones, not as a valid manual disarm. That meant someone had entered the exact password, and I hadn't changed it since moving in. That's when I asked for the full access history of the past week. He hesitated but said he could email it. When I received the report, I read it line by line. There was the night the alarm triggered for back door open, and just below it, 2 days later, the manual disarm at 3:17. But there was something else I hadn't noticed before. The day before that initial trigger, there was a record of external zone opening, backyard perimeter, around 10:42 p.m. And that specific night I hadn't been home. I had slept at the same friend's house. The same thing appeared on the Saturday when I returned and smelled damp soil. A perimeter activation shortly after 11 p.m. Exactly on the 2 nights I hadn't slept there. When I realized that the 2 external records matched precisely the nights I wasn't home, my mind started racing in every direction. It wasn't about a faulty sensor anymore. It wasn't about me imagining things. Someone had been in my backyard on the only 2 nights I slept elsewhere. And on the night I was there, someone entered the correct code at 3:17 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table with the report open on my phone, my hands sweating. The house was too quiet again. I started thinking about who knew I had slept elsewhere. I hadn't posted anything on social media. Only my friend knew. My ex-husband knew where I lived, but he had no apparent reason to do something like that. Still, the feeling that someone was tracking my schedule began to suffocate me. I called the landlord and asked directly how many people knew that code. He said it had never been changed since it was installed years ago. He said previous tenants had likely used the same password. My stomach turned. I immediately asked to change the code and schedule a complete system replacement. While talking to him, I stared out the kitchen window at the backyard. The wooden fence had small marks near the side gate, as if it had been lightly pushed or pressured. I had never noticed them before. Maybe they had always been there. Maybe not. I began to realize how I had never truly examined every detail outside. I had always assumed the neighborhood was safe enough not to worry. Now I couldn't stop imagining someone standing there in the dark, knowing exactly when I wouldn't be home.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.